Imagine living your entire life within a circle no wider than 10 miles. Not because you lacked curiosity, not because the world wasn't vast and fascinating, but because leaving was dangerous, expensive, uncertain, and sometimes impossible. Tonight, we travel back to 19th century America, a land of dirt roads, flickering candlelight, wooden farmhouses, and quiet horizons that stretched endlessly across fields and forests. A time when most Americans were born, lived, worked, married, and died without ever seeing a city skyline, a coastline, or even the next county. In the early 1800s, America was still young. Vast stretches of the country were wilderness. Even in the more settled eastern states, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, communities were deeply local. Families built lives around farms, churches, small mills, and modest town centers. Travel was not casual. It was not recreational. It was not taken lightly. For many Americans in 1820, the farthest they might ever go was the neighboring town, perhaps 7 or 8 miles away, to attend church, trade goods, or visit distant relatives. Beyond that, the unknown. Roads, if they existed at all, were little more than rutted dirt paths. In spring, heavy rains turned them into rivers of mud. In winter, snow and ice made them treacherous. Stagecoaches operated between major towns, but tickets were costly, often more than a laborer earned in several weeks. Most Americans were farmers. Nearly 80% of the population in 1800 lived in rural areas. Farming required constant labor, planting, harvesting, tending livestock, repairing fences, chopping wood, preserving food. Leaving for days meant risking crops, animals, and livelihood. And so, people stayed. A typical farmer in Ohio in 1835 might wake before sunrise. He would step outside into cool morning air scented with hay and damp soil. His world extended to the tree line on the horizon, the barn to his left, the well behind the house, the dirt lane leading toward town. 10 miles away might as well have been another country. Traveling beyond that distance required planning, supplies, and often companionship. Highways did not exist. Railroads were only beginning to spread in the 1830s and 1840s. Before that, most long-distance movement happened by horseback, wagon, riverboat, or on foot. And every mile carried risk. Bandits were rare but feared. Rivers could flood without warning. Bridges collapsed. Horses could stumble. Wheels broke. A simple mechanical failure might strand a traveler miles from shelter. In an age before telephones, before telegraphs, which only appeared widely in the 1840s, communication moved at the speed of a horse. News from another state might take weeks. For many Americans, the world was not the continent. It was not the nation. It was their township. A blacksmith in rural Massachusetts in 1810 likely served the same families for decades. A seamstress in Kentucky might sew dresses for neighbors she had known since childhood. Communities were tight-knit, deeply interwoven. Everyone knew everyone. Mobility was not yet a defining American trait. Marriage patterns reflected this reality. Census records show that many couples were born within a few miles of each other. Courtship often took place at church gatherings, harvest festivals, or barn dances, all local events. The idea of traveling across states to meet someone would have seemed extraordinary. But geography was only one reason people stayed close to home. There was also economics. In the early 1800s, cash was scarce in rural areas. Barter was common. A farmer might trade corn for tools, eggs for cloth, labor for grain. Without ready money, paying for transportation, Horses, ferries, stagecoaches was difficult. Time itself was a currency. If a journey took 3 days each way, that meant nearly a week away from work. Crops would not wait. Cows would not milk themselves. Fires in the hearth needed tending. And so people stayed. Even the concept of leisure travel barely existed for ordinary Americans. Travel was purposeful, migration westward, business, military service, or urgent family matters. For some, the first time they left home was to move permanently. Consider a young woman born in rural Virginia in 1828. She grows up helping her mother churn butter, spin wool, and tend the garden. At age 20, she marries a farmer whose land lies 6 miles away. She moves into his home. That 6-mile journey may be the longest she ever makes. Her entire life unfolds within that modest radius. She hears stories of New York City, of ships arriving from Europe, of gold discovered in California in 1848, but those places are myths, almost fairy tales. Only a tiny percentage of Americans would join the great migrations west. The Oregon Trail, beginning in the 1840s, drew thousands, but thousands were still a small fraction of the population. For every pioneer heading west in a covered wagon, there were dozens who remained rooted. And yet, something began to change. In the 1830s and 1840s, railroads started to stitch the country together. Iron tracks cut across farmland and forests. Suddenly, journeys that once took days could be completed in hours. A trip of 20 miles no longer felt impossible. By 1860, rail lines connected many major cities in the north. The Civil War itself would dramatically increase mobility as soldiers traveled far beyond their home states for the first time. But before that transformation, before steam engines and telegraph wires shrank the continent, America was a nation of small worlds. 10 miles was not a limitation, it was a life. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, families often lived on the same land for generations. In Appalachian hollows, mountains formed natural barriers that isolated communities. In the Deep South, plantations operated as self-contained systems where enslaved people were forcibly confined and denied freedom of movement altogether. For millions, travel was not just impractical, it was restricted by law and power. The 1800s were not an age of wanderlust for the average person. They were an age of rootedness. Children grew up playing in the same fields their parents had played in. Cemeteries filled with generations of the same surnames. Stories were passed down not of distant adventures, but of local floods, harsh winters, and the year the crops failed. And perhaps there was a certain quiet stability in that. The night sky looked the same each evening. The same constellations rose above familiar trees. The rhythm of life followed the seasons, not the clock. Spring planting, summer growth, autumn harvest, winter rest. No airplanes overhead, no highways humming in the distance, only wind through cornfields and the distant call of an owl. As the century progressed, industrialization would begin to pull people toward cities. Factories in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, offered wages that farming could not match. Immigrants arriving from Ireland and Germany would reshape urban life. But even then, many Americans remained close to home. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with widespread rail networks, affordable tickets, bicycles, and eventually automobiles, that regular long-distance travel became common. Before that, 10 miles was comfort. 10 miles was community. 10 miles was identity. And if you had lived in 1825, standing barefoot on the wooden porch of your farmhouse, looking out across fields glowing in the early morning sun, you might not have felt deprived at all. The world you needed was right there.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and the bell notification icon.